Why is it that in our modern world, where we have free access to virtually any information we could possibly want, with the wisdom and knowledge of every age at our fingertips, many of us are seemingly very poorly educated? And more than that, what does it say about our culture that a lot of us have just disregarded education and thrown it to the side as a non essential aspect of our development into mature, well rounded adults? Well, my name is Finn Pope. I'm a Gen Z Catholic, and welcome to my channel. On this channel, I'll mostly be focusing on what I think are some of the biggest problems facing my generation, as well as just sharing different things that, I'm thinking about and working through, particularly as they relate to living out and learning about the faith. And this is my first video, so thank you very much if you're watching. Let's get into it. So today I want to propose two reasons for why I think this problem, specifically with poorly educated teens and young adults, has arisen, and address some of the things that I think are contributing to it. Then I'll offer just a few personal tips that have helped me in furthering my own education. But before we do any of that, I think it's really important that we start by talking about the purpose of education and why it's actually very important for living a good and happy life. So, real education is grounded in the pursuit of truth. No matter what area of study it is, at a fundamental level, it has to be grounded in the truth. And by truth here, I'm not simply referring to the facts about a given subject, like the facts about mathematics or history or a science or whatever. Rather, I'm referring to a level beneath just the information itself. I'm talking about the framework we use to understand and interpret that information, the way in which we receive that information. I think we have to start there, because education needs to be grounded in a true and fundamental understanding of ourselves as human beings, that we're both body and soul, and that we're ordered towards a specific end, namely God. I think without this starting point, or as is often the case today, with the wrong starting point, we can't actually make sense of the world and of the different areas we're studying, the different areas that we are receiving education in. We can't actually make sense of them entirely without this basic framework. And this is how education ultimately will contribute to our becoming virtuous, happy people. Because to be happy, as St. Thomas Aquinas, who is arguably the greatest doctor of the church, he's often called the angelic doctor, as he defines happiness, it's to live in accordance with one's own nature. It isn't a feeling, it's not like a fleeting pleasure, kind of this idea of happiness that we often have today, that it's just this fleeting sort of emotion, this feeling we get. That's not at all the way Aquinas understands happiness. It's rather to live in accordance with the truth. And Aquinas calls this an imperfect happiness. He distinguishes between a perfect happiness, which we can experience in this life, that a perfect happiness we can only experience in heaven when we're seeing God face to face. But in this life, we can experience an imperfect happiness, which comes about through living in accordance with the truth. And so with this understanding, I think with this total reframing of the way we think about happiness today, we see that it's not actually something that just comes and goes. It's actually a way of living, which is good news. But this is also how we develop natural virtue, at least in part, is through the pursuit of education. But again, within this framework of actually understanding the ultimate truth, understanding what the ultimate truth is, which is God. Of course, we can't have, in any sense, a perfect understanding of God in this life, but through the pursuit of God as ultimate truth, we will develop natural virtues, like justice, temperance, fortitude, prudence. And this is what I think education should really be about. It should be about making us into mature, good, and happy people. So with all that said, now let's get into the first reason for why I think many of us are poorly educated. And that is that our public school system is largely ineffective. And I know to some of you that's going to sound like a pretty bold claim, so let me explain why I think that's true. Our school system in America is actually based on the Prussian education model, which was designed not with the intent of producing well-educated and well-rounded adults, but rather with the intent of producing obedient soldiers who would basically just do what they were told. The Prussian model was created as a means of strengthening Prussia's military and increasing citizen loyalty to the state. And you can research this for yourself. It's actually really interesting. I'll link to one article from the Cardinal Institute in the description that gives like a really brief summary, just sort of an overview of the Prussian model and how it was implemented in America. But basically, the Prussian model was really more of a military model. It was primarily focused on creating a stronger defense for the state. So then how was this model implemented in America? Well, it had an awful lot to do with a guy named Horace Mann, who is known as the father of American education. And after visiting Prussia and seeing their model for education, Mann decided to take much of what he witnessed back here to America and implement it into a public education system. And over time, this resulted in what many Americans are familiar with today, which is this sort of standardized blanket approach that doesn't actually acknowledge the fact that not everyone is the same, and not everyone, dare I say anyone, is really going to thrive in this environment where you're sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day and just being fed facts and facts and facts to memorize so that you can pass some standardized exam. That's sort of the system we see in place today, and I think it's largely ineffective. It's not a natural environment for people to learn in. So there you have it in a nutshell. A huge part of the reason that many Americans are so poorly educated today, I believe, is actually not their fault, really. It's because they're run through this ridiculous system of just, again, memorizing all of this information for the sake of passing some exam. And it would be worth doing a whole video of its own at some point, solely focused on the issues with our education system and why alternatives like homeschooling, which I was very blessed to be raised in that environment of homeschooling, why something like that is actually a much better alternative. But for our purposes today, I just want to point out that one of the reasons I think we have so many poorly educated Americans is because they were run through this public education system. Moving on to reason 2, which is what I've called the infinite choice problem. And to illustrate the infinite choice problem, I want to give an example of something I think all of us can relate to on some level. We've all had the experience of going to the grocery store just looking to check off a grocery list and being met with an infinite number of choices for every item on our list, right? All you wanted to do was pick up some flour, but you go down the baking aisle and there's like 10 million different kinds of flour to choose from, and you have no idea which one to pick, and it's like totally overwhelming. And I think something similar is going on with the information age, right? We have every imaginable medium for education available to us, and yet we haven't really made use of any of them. And it's not because we aren't online. We're chronically online. My generation averages something like 9 hours per day online. But we aren't actually using any of that time for our own good, or very rarely using any of that time for our own good. We have the potential, to become unbelievably educated. We have just unlimited free information available to us, but we're not actually utilizing those tools for education. We can spend 5 hours on social media, scrolling away, and then walk away from that unable to recall a single thing of substance that we actually learned in that time. And this has also destroyed our attention span. Our attention span is like 5 seconds now. We basically can't pay attention to one thing for any extended period of time. But this chronic online activity, it's not only destroyed our attention span. I think most importantly, it's zapped our curiosity. We've done everything in our power to just completely numb our natural desire for truth. We all have this natural appetite for truth that we have in virtue of our nature as human beings, that we're ordered towards God, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning. But what a lot of us have done by spending so much time online, so much time on social media, video games, whatever it is we've numbed this desire for truth. It's still there, but we do everything we can to suppress it. And that has just destroyed our curiosity. And education, to some degree, has to start with curiosity. If it doesn't start with curiosity, then you're probably not really going to retain any of what you learn. Again, this is kind of part of the problem with our current public education system is it doesn't really spark curiosity in the way that it's set up. And so I think that this is something that shouldn't be overlooked. All right, finally, let me offer just a few tips, a few things that have helped me in furthering my own education. And the first thing I'll encourage you to do is actually to pray, because prayer orders us toward our ultimate end, which is God. When we pray honestly and sincerely, really opening our hearts and minds to God, what happens is we start to see things as they really are, and we begin to see ourselves as we really are. In praying, we start to understand that we're not mere body, we're body and soul. And when we reject this reality or we start to neglect this reality, what ultimately happens is we begin to reject ourselves. We start to live in constant war with ourselves because we don't actually understand our own nature. Second is to just pick one topic to learn about at a time. I know I have this tendency, I'm sure a lot of you do too, of having like a list of, a million different things you want to learn about, and you just kind of learn bits and pieces from this and that subject, and it's just sort of this hodgepodge mess of random facts about all these things. And for myself, I know that's been an extremely ineffective way of actually learning, understanding, and retaining the material that I want to. Instead of doing that, just pick like one thing. Say, okay, this month I'm going to just have this one topic that I'm really going to focus on, and by the end of the month I'm going to have a firm grasp of it. I'm going to have a decent understanding of it. For myself, I've found that to be far, far more effective. I think we need to get away from this sort of quick fix approach that we have to our personal education, where, like I said, we just kind of take in all these random tiny bits of information about this and that subject, and there's no real coherence to it. There's no structure to it. That's not an effective way of learning. We ought to strive not just to know facts about things, but to really understand the area of study, to really understand the topic that we want to learn about. And I don't think that we can really do that with this quick fix approach that a lot of us have. My final tip is to write. You should be writing constantly. You should write about your own life, things going on in your life, and a journal or something like that. But you should also be writing about the subjects and topics that you're learning about. And that's how you learn to think. It's by writing about these ideas, by talking with other people about them. That's how you become an interesting, well-educated person. I'll never forget when I started doing this in high school. Not that I'm some super interesting, well-educated person, but I just remember very vividly when I started to actually write about things I was thinking about in high school when I was around 15. And I started to see these different areas of my life sort of from a different perspective, from maybe like a more sophisticated perspective, because I was breaking them down in a journal and writing about, well, what do I actually think about this thing going on in my life, and how do I understand this? And then what's cool is you can look back on those journals, you can look back on things you write later and see how you've developed, how your understanding of things has changed. It's sort of like taking progress pictures, if you have like a fitness goal or some other goal where you're tracking your progress. I like to think of it in a similar way. So if you take nothing else from this video, please take my first tip, which is to pray, and this one, which is to write. I really think this needs to be emphasized, that in writing, you learn how to think, because we use speech to convey ideas. And so when you write, you can see your ideas plainly laid out, or maybe they're probably not your ideas. You're probably not the first person to think of them, but regardless, you see these ideas laid out plainly, and you can sort of analyze them and critique them and look back on them later and see how you've changed. And so I think this is very, very important for your education, for your overall development as an adult into a mature person. Okay, I'll leave it at that. If you made it all the way to the end, you watched all the way through my half-coherent ramblings about why your education matters, then props to you. I hope and pray that you found something useful in all of it. If you agree or disagree, be sure to leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what your perspective is on all of this. Now go learn something, and also like and subscribe, and share with someone you love if you feel so inclined. I'll see you next time.